welcome to CAPSPAN and CBC's presidential debates. I'm Izzy Lott, and tonight we'll be talking with the candidates about important policy issues for their upcoming term. Our candidates are Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Marco Rubio. Candidates have 1 minute to answer each question. To begin, Marco Rubio, in your opinion, what is the biggest problem facing America today? How might you work to rectify it within your first 100 days in office?
Well, the biggest problem facing America today is that our children are not being prepared with the skills they need and given the education they need to succeed in the global economy, mainly because education, past secondary education, is very hard to come by due to the large costs and due to the debt. So even if students are able to afford for a good secondary or post-secondary education, they will be left with heaping amounts of debt and be right off the bat struggling to succeed in our country.
Same question to you, Hillary.
Well, I would say that making the middle class stronger is definitely the biggest problem that we face today in America. As we all know, our economy is suffering but getting better, so we need to continue to support the middle class by raising the minimum wage to a livable amount, and therefore we can help the entire job industry recover from our recent recession.
And finally, Bernie?
The biggest problem facing America today, although there are many problems, is the fact that politicians and the legislative branch in general is owned by the billionaires. To fix this, we must get money out of politics, and I would do this either by appointing Supreme Court justices to overturn the Citizens United decision, or working with members of Congress to propose an amendment to the Constitution that would not allow super PACs and 527 groups to create ads and run candidates for any level of government.
Thanks. Hillary, starting with you on this question. As you know, our next president will likely have to deal with a Congress that is horribly gridlocked. How would you work with legislators to advance your agenda?
Well, first I would like to discuss my experience. I was a U.S. Senator for 2 terms, and I served on various committees during my tenure, so I already have had congressional experience, and I understand what it's like to work in that field. I also would like to say that many of my views, specifically on foreign policy, I am willing to compromise and work with both parties to make sure that America is well represented and well protected abroad and around the world. So I would say that considering our foreign policy goals and considering as well a few of our domestic policy goals, that I am willing to compromise with both parties on the subject.
Bernie Sanders?
Well, similarly, I've had plenty of experience. I was in the House of Representatives for 8 terms, and I'm in my 2nd term in the U.S. Senate. And I would work on the broad issues that we can all address, such as climate change and job creation, and then start moving towards the partisan issues like healthcare and education and campaign finance reform. And to do so, we can show the American people that Congress is willing to make steps forward, and then hopefully they will elect people that they wish to see make these changes in Congress.
Marco Rubio?
Well, as is clear, we are all very experienced politicians. That does not need to be mentioned. We are all well experienced in Congress. As president, I would work hard to ensure unity in my party and cooperation with the other party. And although I am willing to listen to the voice of the people and to the advice of my fellow Americans and my fellow politicians, I would strive to do what I know is best for our country and secure the best environment and the best global economy for our nation.
Thank you. Starting with you this time, Bernie. Some people say that the economic recovery isn't going as fast as it could. As president, how do you plan to help the working and middle class?
Well, we need to put people back to work. American unemployment is about 13%, youth unemployment is 17%, and African American unemployment is off the charts. To do this, I propose a $1 trillion job creation program spread out over 5 years that would put an estimated 13 million Americans back to work. To do this, we will create several jobs to revitalize our nation's crumbling infrastructure, similar to what FDR did in his New Deal plan. And through doing so, we will put Americans back to work that will give many Americans new jobs and give them money to spend and help from the bottom to work our way back up to a world economy.
Marco Rubio?
I see a problem with Mr. Sanders' plan of a $5 trillion plan to produce jobs. We gain a national debt of $1 trillion a year, and I don't see where this money is going to come from. Instead, we should lower taxes because that will give small business owners and big corporations the ability to hire more workers, whereas if we had to increase taxes, they would have to make cuts and fire workers. And that would take people off the ladder, and it is clear that people need to get on the ladder before they can start climbing it.
Hillary?
Well, as I mentioned before, raising the minimum wage is very important. So doing that, and I believe that cutting taxes for the middle class and raising taxes on the wealthy will provide a balance between easing the job of the middle class into a more stable economic environment, as well as maintaining a source of government income from the wealthy who can afford to be taxed. As well, I would like to mention that a college education is extremely important to many of the jobs that are currently available in our global economy. So I would say that lowering student debt and overall smoothing out the educational process for students will help them become more prepared for a real-life career in our 21st century world.
All right, thank you. Starting with you this time, Marco Rubio. Healthcare is an important issue for both working and middle class as well as high-paying workers. Speaking broadly, what do you think is the right way to make healthcare more affordable and more effective for everyone?
Well, it's a simple answer, and that is privatizing healthcare, and that would mean that people on healthcare would not have to pay enormous taxes in order to afford healthcare, in order to receive healthcare from the national government, and would instead be able to work with, we'd be able to work with private corporations to provide a more generous healthcare to the people.
Hillary Clinton?
I am a supporter of the Affordable Care Act. I think that the right to health care, the right to stability, the right for all people to know that they have something behind them when they get sick, I think that is extremely important, because right now, in the current situation, if somebody falls severely sick and they have a family to support and they are not able to acquire the health care that they need, they simply fall off the American dream ladder that they have been climbing. They've been working so hard. So I am a supporter of the Affordable Care Act, and I believe that national health care should continue to be pushed by both parties for the right to health care to be upheld.
Thank you. Bernie Sanders?
While I support the modest gains of the Affordable Care Act, 31 million Americans still have no health insurance, and many more only have are underinsured and need more. To do this, we need to implement a Medicare for all system. That means that every American has health insurance and can therefore be sure that when they go to the doctor's office that they are insured and can afford what they are going there for. Similarly, through a Medicare for all system, I would ensure that healthcare is between a woman and her healthcare provider and not a woman and her employer, so that contraception and other methods can be given to all Americans.
Thank you. Starting with you this time, Hillary. Does climate change, if it exists, pose a significant danger to our country's future? What would be your policy on energy while in office?
Climate change is real. The science shows the facts. Humans have a severe impact on our environment. So I would say that we should tax large corporations for the amount of carbon or harsh chemicals that they produce, as well as controlling water pollution, making sure that they aren't simply dumping their chemicals away in a sort of national garbage waste. I would also say that besides a carbon tax, we should also have tax incentives, cutting taxes for companies who strive to use green energy.
Bernie Sanders?
Climate change is very real. Science shows this, and it is probably the largest problem facing this world today. We need to work with other countries and work within our own country to cap emissions and also look for alternative energy sources. I do not think that what we can do is incentivize corporations and companies to lower their emissions. We have to require them to lower their emissions and punish them if they do not, using the funds collected from these fines to help clean up the environment if they are not willing to.
Marco Rubio?
Well, taxation and expensive capping programs are just going to be an immediate detriment to our economy. And while the environment is a very important issue, and science has shown that we severely affect our environment, we won't be able to enjoy the benefits of having a clean country and a clean world if our economy is in such dire straits that people can't even think about what they're going to do for the weekend, where they have to go on food stamps just to bring food for their children because they lost their job, because they were fired, because their employer couldn't afford to pay them anymore.
Thank you. Starting with you, Bernie. Sorry, excuse me. How would you deal with the growing police violence and incidents like the Baltimore riots?
Well, we need to address police violence, not by, first by limiting military equipment sent to police. Second, we need to ensure that if a person is killed by law enforcement officials, that it was entirely justified and that that person posed a lethal threat to that officer. What we must do is ensure that any person, even suspected of committing violence against American citizens, is given the right to a free and unbiased trial where it can be determined whether they did or did not do the crime that they are charged with. Through this, we will ensure that the people who do commit violence against our citizens are punished, and people who do not and are unfairly charged or thought poorly of are not.
Marco Rubio?
Well, as a nation, we need to continue to push for justice. That means justice for police officers and justice for victims of police violence. We need to improve on police accountability with things such as body cams, with more in-depth investigation of incidents of police violence. But police have to do what they have to do to enforce the law, and if that means that they have to use their firearm to defend themselves or defend citizens from a threat to the public, then we cannot just always prosecute the police. We need to make sure that we are enforcing justice for the police and for the victims of police violence.
Hillary?
The incarceration rate in the United States currently is far too big. It is greater than many other advanced countries in the world. So I would also say to employ police body cameras, make them required. That way both the officer and a potential victim is protected in the situation and justice can be played out. As well, I would say making sure that federal funding to the state and local level go to training and training local law enforcement to make sure that they understand how to deal with various situations. And this hopefully will be able to lower the mass incarceration, especially of African American men, that happens in our country today.
Marco Rubio, starting with you. What do you plan to do to improve gender equality globally?
To improve gender equality globally, well, I sponsored a bill called the Girls Count Act, which provides funding for the investigation of crimes against women in other countries. And I would continue to support legislation such as this in our own country and in foreign nations, because global equality is an issue that is very important to me.
Hillary?
I have been a women's rights advocate for many, many years, ever since I went to college, actually, and before then. I would say that increasing the minimum wage is most definitely a huge step in lowering the gender inequality that's occurring, because most people who are working on the minimum wage are actually women. If we do that, as well as making sure that corporations provide good maternity leave plans and paternity leave plans, as well as affordable child care opportunities, then those combined along with a raise in minimum wage, I believe that those will be effective as a start in making sure that the gender equality gap in this country lessens.
We need to fix the gender inequality in our own country while looking to fix it around the world. We need to ensure that people earn equal pay for equal work, which doesn't mean more legislation. All of the legislation to do this currently exists. What we need to do is effectively, through both the executive and judicial branch, enforce this legislation and then prosecute people who have committed crimes and are discriminating against women in the workplace. Simultaneously, we need to encourage our trade partners to improve their human rights for all people, including women.
Thank you. Hillary, starting with you on this question, what is your stance on American foreign policy? Should we pursue an isolationist or an interventionist approach?
Well, with everything, I believe that there should be a balance between both. Isolationism is simply not possible in today's global economy, and interventionism is simply not possible with the overstretch of American authority. We cannot afford to use too many of our resources for other nations' affairs. However, we do need to protect our own Americans and our allies abroad. So I would say finding a balance between the two of them, using various tools such as diplomacy and military intervention carefully and with a balance. Using both of them, I believe that we can have the most effective foreign policy provided.
Bernie Sanders?
America is one of the world's superpowers, and we must recognize that we have the power to affect global change. However, this means we cannot adapt a gung-ho approach, and we must work with our allies and instead of simply going in guns blazing. For example, to combat the Islamic State, we need to support Muslim nations in the region, such as Saudi Arabia, with airstrikes and selective attacks and coordinating with that government's military, so that we are not the only one affecting global issues, but we are working with many other nations to make the world a better place.
Marco Rubio?
Well, we need to be a force working to protect democracy throughout the world. That means working with other nations using airstrikes and selective attacks, as Mr. Sanders said. Because without safety, without security in our foreign allies and our resources and in our own home country, nothing else matters. If we have equality, if we have justice in our legal system, but our citizens are under the threat of a terrorist attack or under the threat of losing global resources, our country won't be able to function as the free democracy that it is. So we need to make sure that we are using the military might that we have in a reasonable and responsible way to protect our assets and to protect freedom and democracy throughout the world.
Bernie Sanders, beginning with you. Calls for more gun control have increased recently in the wake of numerous mass shootings. Would you pursue such a course of action, and how would you ensure no one's Second Amendment rights were violated?
Well, all Americans have the right given in the Second Amendment to own a gun. What we need to do is ensure that only capable and intelligent, responsible Americans do own guns. To do this, we need to ensure regulation and increase waiting periods so that people who have committed violent crimes and are not mentally capable are not owning a gun and cannot then use that gun for, as you said, mass shootings. To do this, I propose that we increase the waiting periods and increase screening who is purchasing a gun and allow the FBI and other law enforcement agencies to see who owns a gun, but not to limit the guns that people can own.
Thank you. Marco Rubio?
Well, contrary to what one might think, statistics in our country and throughout the world show that gun control is not the answer to the increased crime rate and the increased rate of shootings. Gun purchases in our nation are in an extreme high, but the crime rate has actually gone down. In Georgia, when a law was passed that required all homes to have a gun, the rate of burglaries and the rate of crimes plummeted. In countries where they are not allowed to own guns, the crime rate is much higher than that of America, for example, Australia and European countries. So implementing gun control not only violates the important right given in the Second Amendment, but it also does nothing to solve the problem of crime and violence in our nation, and in fact will increase it.
Hillary?
I believe that the Second Amendment is extremely important and crucial because everybody should be able to have the freedom to own a gun. However, it is also crucial to make sure that background checks ensure that people who are legally purchasing guns do not have mental handicaps or do not have any background with mental issues, as well as general background checks for the purchaser. I would also say that taking assault weapons off the streets are also extremely important. Assault weaponry belongs to the military, and it does not belong in the streets, in the homes of private citizens. Even though I do respect the Second Amendment, I do not believe that assault rifles should be allowed. And I strongly encourage background checks and making sure in general that Americans understand under what atmosphere.
Marco Ruby, beginning with you. If America were suddenly struck by a major natural disaster or a terrorist attack, what would be your first action in response?
Well, in the case of a terrorist attack, my first response would be to make sure that throughout the world we are safe from that happening again, to make sure that we are protected from a second attack. And with that and a natural disaster, I would promote the states to help their own citizens and in dire need would provide federal funding. But I believe that the states have sufficient funds to recover from an incident such as that. However, the use of the National Guard and other aid agencies that the federal government can provide would be used.
Hillary?
Our first step is to make sure that those who are involved in the situation are okay. We need to make sure that we allocate the appropriate resources to help those impacted by a terrorist attack or by a natural disaster. I would also agree that we, of course, need to step up security for Americans abroad as well as Americans at home to make sure that a second attack does not occur, to make sure that there are not other after effects of such a terrorist attack. In the case of a natural disaster, I would say that it is up to the states to decide what resources to use, and whatever they request the federal government for help, we will most certainly send them the appropriate resources to help them recover.
Bernie Sanders?
In the event of a natural disaster, I would work with state governors and with FEMA to ensure that we protect Americans whose lives may have been threatened and to ensure that the recovery is as swift as possible. In the event of a terrorist attack, what we need to do is to ensure our security and ensure our safety, to immediately protect ourselves and our citizens from a second possible attack, and then work with other countries to ensure that an attack like that could not happen again.
Thank you. Beginning with you, Hillary. The people least involved with politics are the uneducated and lower class. How do you plan on engaging this demographic?
Well, first, this goes back to the education system. Everything starts when you are young, depending on where you are, your socioeconomic status. So I believe that rebooting the education system to make sure that we close the achievement gap, starting from there, I believe that we will be able to provide a fair base for all Americans in order for them to become educated, in order for them to become politically involved, and in order for them to become hardworking, productive American citizens. So reforming the education system and closing the achievement gap would be the start of the entire process of socioeconomic status improvement.
Bernie Sanders?
Simply what we need to do is ensure that every American can get a college education. To do this, we have to make college education free for all Americans. And then once people are out of college or working while in college, we need to raise the minimum wage, not to a more tantalizing starvation wage, such as $10.10, but to a real living wage, like $15 an hour. And once we have a higher minimum wage so that all Americans are earning a living wage and can get a free college education so that they are both wealthier and have a higher education and can more actively find jobs in the workplace, we will have a stronger working class and a better lower class so that we can ensure a strong America.
Marco Rubio?
Well, poverty is a huge cause of the achievement gap, so making economics an integral part of secondary education and also vocational education so that instead of going to expensive college or to a community college, students out of high school go to a vocational school where they learn a trade where when they graduate they can go straight into the job of their expertise without being in heaping amounts of debt. In addition, we must lower taxes on businesses so that they can hire more workers because people in poverty need to get on the ladder, as I said before they can start climbing it. So we need just overall to produce a better climate for those in poverty.
We're starting on our final question now. Bernie Sanders, if you're elected as president, what would be your overall vision for America in 4 years?
In 4 years, I want to see that America as a whole, the working class, is in a better place than they are now. To do this, that means revitalizing our healthcare system, putting people back to work, giving them free education, and raising the minimum wage to ensure that the working class is smarter, healthier, and wealthier. If we do this, then America will continue to be the greatest country in the world.
Marco Rubio?
I want to make sure that those in poverty are given the opportunity to climb their way out of poverty and that those who are unable to are treated fairly and with justice. I want to ensure that our country remains on top of the economy, on top in a top position throughout the world through the use of our military to protect democracy throughout the world and by improving education so that we have the smartest minds and the most efficient workers in the world.
Hillary?
We need to focus on problems at home. We need to make sure that social issues are resolved, that every American lives in a country and in a world where their rights are recognized. We need to make sure that the economy provides a fair opportunity for everyone by improving education, by raising the minimum wage, and also by making sure that corporations are also being environmentally friendly because our nation is not the only country in the world. And this also leads us into foreign policy. We need to make sure that abroad and everywhere else in the world, Americans are protected and Americans are secure, and we also need to make sure that our relations in a 21st century global economy with other countries are strong and provide us with excellent trade opportunities. And overall, more social justice, making sure that Americans get the education they deserve, and also protecting them from unfair discrimination.
Thank you. Thank you for watching the CAPSPAN and CBC presidential debates. Marco Rubio, Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders, I wish you luck on the rest of your campaigns. In order to stay up to date with the presidential race, follow CAPSPAN and CBC on Facebook and Twitter. Again, I'm Izzy Lott, and thank you for watching.